Hi, my name is Trish, and it's been a while since I've talked about bookish things here in my BookTube channel. I was trying to expand my horizons, I will not apologize. Anyway, I am now back with my bookish content, and to commemorate the event, I did plan a really stunning yellow number on my eyes, but unfortunately, eyeliners are bitch, and one eye was perfect while the other eye smudged and ruined everything. But I did take a picture for all of you to appreciate the effort, since that all went down the drain. Here is my beautiful semi-bare face. I did put on some blush to at least make this video a bit special. So in this video, I will be talking about my favorite... So in this video, I will be talking about all the books that I read in 2022. Yes, all 14 of them. I will not be doing separate videos for my most disappointing reads of 2022 or my most favorite reads, because 14 is already an abysmal number without me having to divide it, and 2, I want to break the cycle of me posting my most disappointing reads of the year but not getting into my favorite reads of the year because I got too lazy. This is why none of you know my favorite books of 2020 and 2021. Now, this list isn't ranked, it's arranged in chronological order according to when I read them last year. And so without further ado, here are all the books that I read in 2022. So the first book that I finished last year was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. There are a lot of motorcycles passing by, and I cannot stop filming because if I do, I will never be able to film again. So I'm sorry. Anyway, The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. This is a novella about a monk who joins a group of thieves. A band of bandits, as they go on a road trip together. Quick and thrilling, but not lacking in substance, and compelling characters. True, this was a very fast read for me, surprisingly. And despite the short amount of time, the story was really able to deliver a really good plot that kept on moving, but still had enough space for backstory so we could know the characters more. And the characters themselves were fleshed out enough for me to actually care about them. That being said, while I loved most of the characters, I surprisingly was a bit very annoyed by the monk character. There was just something about her that annoyed me. And I didn't expect that because she was a monk. Like, I was expecting to like her. You know, me and fictional monks, I have a good history with them. But anyway, still a really good book. Still would recommend. It was a fun time. The next book that I finished was Between Perfect and Real by Ray Stove. So in the story, we follow our main character who comes out as a trans man to his theater group, and he auditions to play the role of Romeo in their upcoming school play. This is one of the more realistic young adult contemporaries that I've read. There's no sugarcoating in this story. There's no rose-tinted glasses. There aren't any fairy tale endings where everything works out. And that's one of the aspects that I really appreciated about the story. We follow our main character as he goes through these struggles about coming out as trans and how people reacted to that. But that's not all that we see about him. We also see him having fun with his friends, being supported by his friends, and actually realizing his hopes and dreams. So it's not all bleak, but it's not all sunshines and rainbows either. I also really like how the story really puts weight on the characters' actions. As the story progresses, what characters do anywhere during the book reflects throughout the story. Like what a character did in the beginning of the book carries over until the end of the book. And I really like those kind of stories. The next book that I finished was The Forest of Stolen Girls by Jane Her. This is a young adult mystery thriller about a young girl who goes back to her hometown to search for her missing father. Her father was a detective who was involved in this case about girls going. Regroup your thoughts, Trish. Regroup. Her father was a detective who was involved in a case about girls disappearing in their hometown. And this case was important to him because the main character and her sister were involved in it years ago. So this was a creepy and atmospheric read. I liked that when there were scary scenes, the author really leaned into the scariness. Even though the book was mainly a mystery thriller, it still didn't shy away from having those horror aspects to it. What I didn't like though was that this story was supposed to be about two sisters, but their sisterhood didn't really appeal or convince me. Like, I did wish that the story delved or worked. What is that? Like a disco at this time of night? Anyway, good for them. I wish that the sister aspect was worked into the story more, like it was given more focus, more importance. It felt like it was important, but wasn't really shown that it was important. I don't know. The consequences of their sisterhood didn't really affect the story much at all, for me at least. Also, I didn't like the main character very much. So for someone who is an aspiring detective, she didn't really give me enough to have faith in her. Most of the clues to the mystery that she discovered, she got through accidents or unexpected circumstances, not directly because she was doing good detective work. So the strongest point of the book for me was really the plot and the story itself. I thought it was a spooky thriller, and the pacing of the book was just so well paced that the allure of the mystery did not wear off even until the end of the book. The next book that I read was The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, and this is actually one of my favorite books of last year. So this book is a historical fiction. It is inspired by true events about these three lamplighters or people who work on lighthouses. I don't know what they're officially called. It's about these three men who suddenly go missing, and it's a mystery because the lighthouse that they left behind, there's no sign of forced entry, no sign of violence, no sign that anything bad had happened there. So where are these three men? So in this book, we follow the perspectives of these three men before they disappeared, and also the perspectives of the women that they left behind. And we follow these women as they carry the burden of their disappearance, the grief and the anger and the questions left unanswered. This book had everything that I like in historical fiction: multiple POVs, multiple timelines, and a plot that matched the unfolding of each person's story so well that it could have gone for as long as possible and I will still be entertained. Like, for anyone interested in picking this up, be forewarned that it is very slow paced, but I like historical fictions that are slow paced but still have things going on. The next book that I finished is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. Allow me some grace here because I actually cannot remember what the story is about. I'm just gonna search for it. Okay, so we're reading from Goodreads so that I don't just make up a fictitious plot out of nowhere. This is the story of a serial killer, a stolen child, revenge, death, and an ordinary house at the end of an ordinary street. That didn't tell me much. But what I do remember is that there's this case about a little girl who disappeared or was murdered, and in the present day we follow her sister who is still struggling with the disappearance of her sister, and we also follow the perspective of the assumed serial killer. This book, I'm not sure how I feel about it because on one hand there were a lot of times when I felt uncomfortable about what I was reading, and I can't put into words why I was uncomfortable. I just was, which I guess might be a plus for some people, for people who are used to reading thrillers. For me, like, it took away from my reading experience. On the other hand, it had a plot twist that I really did not see coming, and I really appreciated the shock from that. And yet, on another hand, I'm not sure if I liked the plot twist either. Let me clarify. I liked the plot twist in its essence. I liked that it was able to surprise me. But I didn't like the twist itself. I just couldn't sit with it well. I'm not going to describe, even in the vaguest terms, what the plot twist was, because it will give everything away about the story. I guess if there is something I can say about this book, and it surprises me that I don't have a lot to say about this book, because if I remember correctly, I gave this a decent rating in Goodreads. But anyway, if there's something that I can say about this book, is that it really subverts expectations. Also, I wasn't a fan of the consequences of the plot twist. I wasn't satisfied with the things that happened after. I also didn't like the pacing of the plot. It was just too damn slow. It took a road trip getting to the plot twist, getting to the climax, getting to when things are actually happening. It was just too slow. And because of that, most of the allure of not knowing what was going on, it kind of just dissipated along the way. The next book that I read was 8 Detectives by Alex Pavesi. This is a book about a girl who interviews this mystery author about his stories because she suspects that he might be involved with a killing of a young woman years ago. And she thinks that his stories hold the clue or the proof of his guilt. This story is very heavily inspired and influenced by Agatha Christie, and it's actually a story within a story or multiple stories within a story, because as the main character interviews this author, we also read the stories that the author wrote. So the plot is basically the present day, a story, back to the present day, another story. I like that structure. It kept me on my toes. The stories in between were a good break from the present day plot that honestly was not that very interesting. What I didn't like about this book was that it just had too many plot twists to the point that it was comical. I couldn't take any of it seriously anymore. Like, there can be a thing as too much plot twist. And I mean, having many plot twists isn't bad in itself. Take No Exit, for example. But the plot twists here were just one after the other without any regard for its gravity, that it just came across as comedy to me at that point. You know, the first, second plot twist surprised me, but by the 10th plot twist, I was just so tired. Like, what is reality even? The next book is another favorite of mine from last year, and it is Women Talking by Miriam Toews. This is another story that is inspired by true events. So it follows a group of Mennonite women who have been SA'd for years, and they were told that they were being hurt by the devil because of their evilness, when it turns out that they were being harmed by the men in their community. And when these men were taken to jail awaiting bail, these women grouped together to talk about what they should do next. If they should stay in the community and act like nothing happened, if they should stay in the community and demand justice from their leader regarding the atrocities that have been done against them, or if they should pack up and leave. This book is interesting in its structure. First of all, there's not really a plot going on, just a lot of talking. It's mainly character driven. So we really get to know each of these Mennonite women and what they stand for and how that affects their decisions. This book really is a practice on understanding and empathy, because I found myself disagreeing with some of the women here, but at the same time, I can't fault them for how they thought or how they made decisions for themselves. Another really interesting part of this book is that it's actually told from a man's point of view. So there's this one guy who is also an outcast among the other men in the community, and he knows how to write, and so the women take him as a scribe for their meetings. It is implied that he supports these women and wants them to make a decision that is good for themselves. I say that this is interesting because, you know, part of me is put off by the fact that women's stories, especially stories as important and heavy as this, is being told through the lens and the mouth of a man. At the same time, I do understand that it lends some realism to the story because these women were not educated, they were not not literate, so they couldn't really record their meetings for themselves. I'm going to admit that even until now, I'm not really sure what the author's intention was with writing the story through the lens of a man, especially when it's supposed to be these women's stories. I guess that's symbolic in a way. But personally, I felt like that didn't take too much from the gravity of the story and what these women were talking about. So the next book that I read was Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Iyimide. So this is a YA thriller about two black students who go to this prominently white private school, and they're being targeted by this mysterious person who is sending private and sometimes incriminating photos, messages, or things about them and posting them online for everyone to see. It's a very entertaining and thrilling book written in this very gossip girl-esque style. I think that's the main reason why I didn't enjoy this book so much. Don't get me wrong, the story itself was enjoyable. It's just, I think it was the gossip girl tone and atmosphere to it, because I wasn't a fan of Gossip Girl. Don't look at me! No, I wasn't a fan of Gossip Girl. And I just don't enjoy that tone and format of storytelling. So I guess that took away from my enjoyment of reading this. For the characters, I have to say that the two main characters that we follow were the most interesting characters here. All the other characters were just meh. Basically, it's a really good book. So if you like Gossip Girl-esque storytelling, this is the book for you. Don't be deterred by the fact that I didn't like it, because really it was just personal taste over quality. I'm not proud to say that. The next book that I read was Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I can't read it anymore. Before the Coffee Gets Cold and Tales from the Cafe by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a story about a cafe where people can travel to the past, but there are a set of rules that they have to follow. They can't get off their seat. They can only go back to a time that happened inside the cafe, blah, blah, blah. It's better if you read the story so you can have a full grasp of all the rules and regulations of time traveling. But anyway, this book is sort of like a collection of short stories from the number of characters that we encounter here. But there's also one main story that we follow about the characters of the cafe itself. It's a very cozy book with heartwarming stories that have just enough substance and emotion to keep you invested. So if you want to read a book, or books, because this is a series, I think. If you want to read a book that has the feels but isn't too heavy, then this is it. The next book that I read was Cracked Up to Be by Courtney Summers. And this is a YA thriller about this girl who used to be the most popular girl in their school but is now disgraced due to a mysterious event that happened prior. And now we follow her as she carries this emotional baggage about that mysterious event and how this event has negatively affected her status in school, and her relationship with her friends, or at least I think they were her friends, because they were pretty shitty towards her. And to be fair, she was also pretty shitty towards them. Everyone was just pretty shitty towards each other. But I did read and finish this book because I really like Courtney Summers' writing. And despite the stress of following her headspace, I also did find the main character compelling. There was something about her that brought out my sympathy and empathy. Following her and being in her head allowed me to see every facet of her, and not all these facets were things that I liked, but at the same time I couldn't help rooting for her. I couldn't help wanting her to get through all this emotional turmoil and having, a better hopeful ending. This book is definitely character driven, which I guess lent to why it was so stressful to read, because if the characters themselves are stressful, of course I'm going to be stressed. But I guess it was still interesting to read. The next book that I read was another favorite of last year, and that was The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. This is a fantasy that spans multiple generations, of course, multiple timelines, multiple POVs, I love. It follows Zoraida Cordova, who has this magic in her that affects her family throughout generations, and it follows her grandchildren as they deal with the consequences of her using this magic, because apparently someone was and is still out to get their grandma. Grandma be having enemies. Not gonna lie, I love the fact that someone can hold a grudge that long though. I have been so fantasy deprived for most of 2022, and this book was just what I needed to pump that fantasy loving heart back up. I don't know why I mimed an actual pump instead of, those things that doctors use. Defibrillators. I should have mimed defibrillators. Anyway, getting back to this book. This book was just so magical. It was so whimsical in tones. Cordova's writing is exceptional. It is stunning. It is flowery in all the right places. Descriptive in all the right places. The writing is just so rich in magic that the book is steeped in it. The characters are also so endearing. It was hard not to immediately just be invested in them. I just really, really enjoyed reading this book. The next book that I read was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is about a middle-aged woman who is working in a convenience store and suddenly finds herself bothered by people who think they know what's good for her and are forcing her to get married and all that stuff. This is a gripping and fascinating commentary on conformity. I'm just going to read from my notes here. To appear smart. The juxtaposition of the main character and that one asshole character from the book was really funny and interesting to me, because this asshole guy wants to appear so unique and different from the others, but at the same time, he's sort of also wants to be accepted. So he wants to be different but also conform. And then we have the main character who just genuinely doesn't care about having to conform and doesn't see the problem with being different. It's a really short book, and it's also a really light one, but the lightness does not detract from the message that it's trying to convey. So if you're up for a quick but meaningful read, this book is perfect. The next book that I read is Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Rowanhorse, and I have a new favorite author to add to my list because this book was amazing. This is a fantasy set in a dystopian Earth where we follow our main character who has gone through some traumatic events in the past and is now a monster hunter, and things start happening in her community, so she has to team up with this other guy. And I'm not explaining the synopsis well, but only because there's a lot of things going on here, so I can't rub enough brain cells together to actually make a coherent summary here. But trust me when I say that the story is good, the plot is phenomenal, the characters, they're so good. I love the main character so much. She's a tough cookie. It's hard to get through her walls at first, but when you do, it's just, I would lay down my life for her. I would want to be her friend. This book is a roller coaster ride of emotions. It doesn't hold back from its punches. It doesn't hold back from its consequences. There are high stakes here. There are thrills. This is a really good book, and I'm really glad that I finally managed to read this, because this book has been in my TBR for so long, and I just picked it up spontaneously one day and ended up finishing it 4 days. That's how good it was. Imagine me reading and finishing a book in 4 days in the middle of a reading slump. That says a lot about the quality and caliber of this book. So go read it. Do yourselves a favor. Read it. Okay, so my camera got too hot and shut down, so I'm gonna have to film the rest of this video with my aircon on, so I apologize for that. But I only have one book left anyway, so you'll only be suffering for a little bit. So the last book that I read in 2022, and also one of my favorites, was Crying in H Mark by Michelle Zauner. When I picked this book up, I did not read the synopsis, which was odd because I usually do read the synopsis in books before I buy them. A good synopsis does do it for me. But in this case, I didn't read it, and so I didn't know that that Michelle Zauner was Japanese Breakfast until I was 1/4 into the book. I've been listening to Japanese Breakfast since 2020, 2021, well before I even picked this book up. And for some reason, Destiny saw it fit that I listened to the album Psychopomp while I read this book. Everything just fell into place to make my reading experience of this book perfect. So Crying in H Mark is a memoir. It's mainly about Michelle Zauner talking about her mother, talking about the grief and having to deal with the loss of her mother. As someone who lost a parent recently, this was not a book that I was necessarily ready to be words, Trish. This wasn't a book that I was necessarily ready to absorb. But I'm glad that I did push through with reading this because this book is absolutely beautiful. Michelle Zauner has a way with words that just struck my heart completely, directly. This book just had me crying like a baby. Like the part where they found out that the treatment wasn't working. I was also listening to the track Psychopomp. You hearing the voicemail from her mother in the song and reading about the voicemail from her mother in the story, it was an emotional experience that I was not ready for and could not be replicated ever again. This was a really beautiful book and I love it so much. So that is it for all the books that I read in 2022. Not a whole lot, but I guess I'm glad to see, looking through this list, that most of them were books that I enjoyed, while not all of them were winners. I wouldn't say they were complete duds. So that is it for this video, and I will see you in the next one, which I hope I will be able to film soon.